So this video is just summarising some of the things that we discussed about Sonnet 29 by Elizabeth Barrett Browning when we studied it in class. And the first thing we're going to talk about is structure. So we're just going to make some key points about the structure of the poem. So it's called a sonnet. It's the structure of a sonnet. A sonnet is 14 lines, and it consists of an octave and a sestet. So the first 8 lines and the last 6 lines. And usually it has a turning point, which is called a volta, in line 9. Now, this particular poem, the turning point is unusually in line 5, and it's with the word yet. So the volta here is in line 5. So one of the things that you would need to comment on in terms of structure is, why is the volta in line 5? Why has she decided to have an early volta? And you can say all sorts of things about that, because you could say that it's because she's too excited by the relationship. She can't contain her feelings about the relationship. It's an overwhelming intensity of love. Her love is all consuming, and therefore she can't wait until line 9 to actually make that change. So you can use a structural point to make a comment about the nature of the love, the depth of her love that she is experiencing. So we're just going to go through the poem chronologically, and I'm going to make some comments about some of the key language devices, just things that you might need to comment on depending on the question that you're answering. So the first thing is this line, "I think of thee," and the use of the word thee. It's an old-fashioned word, not even very much used when Barrett Browning was writing, but it's a personal word. It's rather like the difference between the French vous and tu. It's much more informal, so it tells you something about the relationship that she's using an informal word there. And the exclamation mark tells you something about the level of her feelings as well, that she's in a state of heightened emotion already at the beginning of this poem. Now, the poem uses an extended metaphor throughout, of the metaphor of a tree with vines being wound around it, and the lover is the tree. Barrett Browning's thoughts is the vine, sort of entwining the tree. She says here, "My thoughts do twine and bud," and that makes her seem needy and clingy, that her thoughts are sort of uncontrollable, that they're wrapping around each other. But bud also suggests a kind of growth, so something positive perhaps, because it's it emulates the twining of the vine, but also the fact that these new feelings are growing. It's about growth and newness. The enjambment after, so the fact that the one line carries on into the next line without any punctuation, without a full stop or an exclamation mark at the end, sort of emulates or copies the fact that this relationship, this love, is still growing. So the line itself emulates the twining of the vine, and that it keeps on growing. And the fact that her thoughts are twining and budding about thee, about him as the tree, so her thoughts are the vines which are winding around the tree, suggests that maybe she's it's a bit constricting. She's beginning to sort of tie him up, and it's almost like you lose the reality of him because he's covered with these thoughts which might not even be realistic. She calls them wild vines, so there's this sense of uncontrolled, the uncontrolled nature of her thoughts. And we talked in the lesson a lot about what connotations we have with a tree. We also spoke about the solidity of a tree, that she needs him to be stable and rooted, so that actually his roots are going down and he's the one that's keeping her upright. So even with the idea of the image of the vines wound round him, the tree is the solid structure and the vines are winding round, but actually if they grow too much, they're going to obscure the tree completely, so they might obscure him completely. There are more elements of the uncontrolled nature of her thoughts in the word straggling. So it's untidy, it's not controlled, it's all over the place. Her thoughts are wandering. Here, after the volta of yet, where the tone changes, she seems to have a new determination for something to change. When she says, be it understood, she uses an order. So she uses an imperative to say, I will not have my thoughts instead of you. I would rather have you in reality than just thinking and fantasizing about you. And we talked in class about how the forceful nature of what she says there would be quite unusual for a Victorian woman. So she would have been expected to have been rather more quiet and passive. But here she's not passive at all. She's issuing an order. And I will not. So there's a sense of determination there. We also talked in the lesson about how many syllables there were in each of these lines. The fact that in these lines 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, she's using iambic pentameter. So there's 10 syllables in each of these lines, but that changes in line 7. So in line 7, she then has 11 syllables. Then it's back to 10, and then there's 12. So the number of syllables change, and that seems to suggest that she's breaking out of the restrictions of iambic pentameter. Remember, we said that iambic pentameter is reminiscent of a human heartbeat, and maybe you could argue that when you have more syllables in a line, it's because there's a sense of determination or excitement coming through. In the second part of the poem, there's more evidence of the use of the imperative. So she says, instantly renew thy presence. So come to me really quickly. Again, an order and rather determined. But she asks him to be a strong tree. She wants him to be masculine and powerful and be the solidity in this relationship. She's full of obsession and desire and her love is overwhelming her, and she needs him to be the stability in the relationship. Here, it's been argued that this section here, she's asking him to be the powerful one and break out of the confines of all the thoughts which are represented by the vine wrapping around him. But some commentators have also seen that there's a sexual element to this, that she's not just commanding him to come and see her, but it's rather sensual and suggestive of being naked. And here, let these bands of greenery which ensphere thee drop heavily down, burst shattered everywhere. There's a sense of speed here, which might also be reminiscent of a sexual climax. So especially with the frequent punctuation with the commas. There, and the exclamation mark at the end. So there's a sense of speed coming through there as well. Towards the end of the poem, she talks about when he's actually there with her in reality, in physical reality, he gives her a new air, as if he gives her the air to breathe. In the lesson we discussed whether this was a positive or a negative thing. Of course, it could be positive, that somebody's refreshing you and giving you a new start. But we also discussed that this could be a negative thing, because if you rely on someone so much that you need them for the very air that you breathe, then that's rather restricting on you. So we discussed both of those things, as particularly in the context of the question that we were answering, which was about difficulties in relationships. And remember that contextually, the part of the difficulty of this relationship was that Barrett Browning's father strongly disapproved of it. So there was this sense of the relationship being illicit as well.